Hey everyone, welcome to the Reach Teach Show. My name is Joanna Fleur. I thought I would jump on quick today and talk a little bit about the Apple event that just happened today. If you're an Apple nerd, you maybe watched the whole thing, the WWDC event. They do this, event. Yes, big special event every year, and talk about all the new stuff that's coming out from Apple. And so, if you want to nerd out on the tech stuff, there's probably other threads to do that in, or maybe other places that you want to talk about, like, how this is going to actually transform our devices in like a tech way, or you want to talk about, all the silicon chips and all the like nerdy new stuff they did. But the reason that I wanted to jump on today was to talk about what we can learn from how they did the event itself. I'm talking about the presentation and content and what they talked about, this perfectly scripted event, because so many of our churches now are meeting online, are thinking about digital in a new way, thinking about how to reach and teach people online. And so I wanted to address this with you. The first thing I want to highlight and for churches to pay attention to in the evolution of how these Apple events have happened is, remember the old days. If you think of these classic Apple events, it was Steve Jobs in that outfit he wore, the same outfit all the time, the mock neck shirt and the jeans on the stage. And he had a few of his buddies coming to be part of that presentation, but largely it was the Steve Jobs show. Now, if you see what they're doing in the modern presentation, and this is where I want churches to pay attention to that pivot, is that they have a huge diversity of hosts. So I want you to pay attention to that as a church, because you probably have, typically it's a guy, the one-man pastor show, the guy who's the teacher, pastor, speaker, preacher. Maybe a woman is doing that in your church, but most churches, predominantly, it's a man. And he's really the one who's most featured in the content that you're producing online. But I want you to pay attention to what they did in this Apple event today was a huge diversity of hosts. Are you paying attention to that? There was men, women, different ethnicities and different age ranges in the hosting. They all had a bit of a similar look and feel in terms of maybe what they were being told to wear to kind of make sure that that wasn't super distracting for people. But there was not just one voice, but a community of voices that were teaching and training us. And now some were better communicators than others in terms of like maybe a skill set or a history, a background in communication. But this huge company trying to present content, they wanted to make sure that they had a diversity of voices. So paying attention to that is going to be huge for you and for churches going into the future. Is your church content look like a one man or a one woman show? We want to make sure that if you have an amazing community of people, to leverage them, right? Leverage those people into what you're doing and how you're presenting a Sunday service or another kind of event online. Oh, by the way, if you're listening to this and watching this live, say hi, tell me where you're from, let me know, did you watch the event today, the WWDC event from Apple? I would love to know as we go through this. Maybe there's some stuff that I'm going to mention, that I am not going to mention, that is sticking out to you from when you saw the event. So the first thing I wanted to highlight was that they had a huge diversity of hosts. If your church is presenting content over and over with the same familiar faces, it's time to change it up. In 2020, it's time to change it up with men and women and a representation of different ethnic backgrounds, also a different representation of age. We see people in the Apple event who were, I would say, from 20s to, I don't know, I might have missed a few, maybe 50s. There was like a number of generations represented. Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers were represented. And I want you to consider that too for what you're doing. The next thing that I just want to talk about is that, to me, my best understanding of the whole thing was that it was simulated live. They talked about it like it was a live event, but I think we would all recognize that maybe there were some things about it that were live, But a lot of this was pre-taped and presenting to us like it was live. So I encourage your churches to do that too. There's some stuff that we can't pull off very easily in a real live experience, but if you can pre-tape it and play it live, you can do some amazing stuff, and you can still say that it's live. I think people who are watching our content have a good understanding that live means live to tape. I'm on a TV show here in Canada, and we do live to tape. So we're taping seamlessly. We're not doing cuts and retakes of things. We're taping it live, and that's what's going to go out into the world. But we're doing it in advance, and that allows us to then edit in terms of like graphics and lower thirds or any effects we want to do. I recommend that. So the same thing for churches. What you see was simulated live from the Apple event. It was not live. It allowed them to create some cool effects. It allowed them to probably have people practice a few times before they did it. And it allowed them to give us the presentation that they wanted to give us. So encourage you churches, if you're doing Sundays live, you don't have to do every element of that live. I know some churches are, but especially with things like music, it's really hard to make the music sound good and be really live at the same moment. So encourage you, if you haven't experimented with some of that yourselves, maybe you already have, but I know there are still some churches who haven't done this yet. Think about what we can learn from Apple about simulated live. You can still call it live because it's live to the people receiving it. It's the first time going out in the world, but it isn't actually live. Hey everyone who's just joining, we're talking about today's WWDC presentation by Apple and some things we can pull about how to reach and teach people in the church from what we can learn about, not the content of what they announced today, although there was some really cool stuff for Apple nerds, people who, you know, have all the stuff, that watch and the phone and all that stuff. Maybe you're excited like me about some new things coming from Apple, but the big thing that I want really to highlight for you is how they presented and what choices they made. You know, we can learn from this billion-dollar company, this multi-billion-dollar company. Why not take what they've done as best practices, what connects with us as an audience, and say, hey, we can reach people in the same way. We can teach and train our people in the same way. So the first one I said was the diversity of hosts. The second one that I've mentioned just now is about the simulated live. Most of the content was, in fact, not live. Like I am live to you right now. It was pre-taped. And then it would allow them to have more creativity in how they presented and do it in a way that I think, you know, the audience probably resonated with more. The third thing I want to address that I love how they named it, and makes sense for a company, but I think also makes sense for churches, responding to user requests. So they said a number of times over the course of the presentation that the things that they had added to the abilities of, you know, iMessage, or the abilities of Maps, like iMessage, you can now pin conversations to the top that are your most important ones so they don't get lost. Or in Maps, they said it was their most requested thing to have biking maps, and they're going to be adding more and more cities with biking maps into the next coming months. Just another example of naming. We heard you say you want X, and so we produced this solution for you. I think it's great for churches to name the feedback they're getting and then be able to respond to it. I think it builds trust. I think it builds engagement. I think it makes people feel like they're actually part of the community that you're building if you're responding to the things that they said that they wanted. Of course, we can't bend to every request. Even a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar company like Apple is not doing every single thing that is requested of them. That's not possible. But in the same way for churches, are we responding to the things that people are asking for? You know, if people are saying, hey, we would really love, I don't know, you know, if a lot of people are saying that they want a paper bulletin, have you killed it, but actually the user experience is saying, actually, we really valued having some sort of print piece in our hands. You can still do it in a modern way. You can still think of ways to engage in a way that's on brand and reasonable in what you're able to produce on a weekly, monthly basis. Or maybe they miss a print bulletin and you're not meeting in person right now because of coronavirus issues. And so you want to mail in the mail out some sort of print piece to people who are expressing that kind of desire, whatever it may be for the church. I do hope that just like Apple is naming and doing in their presentation, that you're able to identify some things that are the user feedbacks that you can create as innovation for your church. There's so many things I think that we do in a patronizing way in churches. I've seen, well, like, the leadership knows best, but actually I think that the community knows best. I encourage you to continue to hear the feedback of people and be willing to be humble enough to alter or change, or be excited enough and value your community enough to receive the feedback about what it is that they want out of their experience in your community, and then offer that to them. So Apple said over and over so clearly that some of the things that they were doing were because of consumer feedback. Now that said, there's all kinds of things that they're going to do and innovate that we never would have asked for, we never would have dreamed to ask for. And so we still need to be innovative. We need to be pushing things forward, being creative in what we're doing. But I love that Apple is naming the things that they're doing specifically because people asked them to do it. Let's be as transparent and clear in our communication as possible as we are teaching our people that it's okay to not have everything right and have a new iteration. Let's stop there for a second and just say, do you notice that, like, with iOS 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, I think it's iOS 14 is the one that we're on now. That's the iPhone operating system, iOS. Isn't it amazing to just even recognize that they're naming their own progression? They're telling you at the beginning where they came from, and now they're telling you where they're going into the future. That it's okay for churches to change. It's okay for churches to try new things, to upgrade technology, to to basically just move with the times, just as Apple is doing. Naming the iterations allows for change and allows for growth. And it allows that to be celebrated, the history of where you've come from and the movement to where you're going. Paying attention to how Apple does that and how they communicate that clearly to their people, I think, is, again, another thing that churches could learn so much from as we try to implement change, as we try to grow and respond to the times that we live in. If we're doing everything the same as we were doing, in 2010, then I think, we as churches are so behind now, 10 years later, in cultural change, in language, in the ways people's lives are shaped and formed by these devices in their hands, that we do need to constantly be changing. And we can create a culture where that change is expected, just like they're doing. So that every year when WWDC, the presentation comes out, nerdy people like me, and maybe you're those kinds of people too, you are like at your computer waiting to find out what the changes are, because you want to hear about the new stuff. You're excited to talk about it, to share it, to see it, because you feel part of the community and connected to it in the long term. So change is good. And change can be welcomed and celebrated by your community if you build anticipation, if you build expectation that change is going to happen year after year after year. What about you? Do you find change hard? I'd love to know if anyone wants to interact with me on this stuff. Change in your community. How is it that you bring change in? How do you bring people along in the community to be excited about changes that you're making? I'd love to know about that. Another item I want to point out from this Apple presentation today is I love that they addressed competition challenges in a few ways head on. They named some of the things that they were doing in direct response to competition, or to do it better than the competition. So again, it's not acting like everybody knows who's in your community. Everybody knows that there's competition. And I don't just mean competition like another church down the street. I think in churches we need to think of our competition as the soccer league on a Sunday morning. We need to think of it as anxiety and exhaustion that people are experiencing all the time and are struggling to come to church, struggling to know how to fit in, struggling, with social anxiety, or thinking about just busyness of calendars, thinking of all the other plethora of options of activities and things that we can do, whether we're doing an online service or an in-person service. There's all kinds of other things that are competing for people's time and energy. Yes, I love it. Amanda's just saying here, change is good. I heard that quote. We used to say if it's broke, fix it, but we need to think if it's not broke, fix it. Yes, Amanda, that's exactly it. This is something we can learn from Apple and these tech companies, right? That we don't have to wait until it's broken to fix it. We can innovate and build change and build anticipation and excitement in our communities for change, just like Apple does, with millions of people tuning in to their presentation to hear what the new and innovation changes are going to be coming up in the next year. Change doesn't have to be a bad thing. Your community can actually, if it's not broke, break it. I know what you're saying, Amanda. Thanks for that comment. So all to say, change can be good and we want to welcome it. But in the midst of that, we're also acknowledging some of the changes are coming because of competition. So for example, if you are, one of your innovations is maybe doing a new service time, maybe you're doing a service on a Wednesday night or a Saturday evening or a Sunday afternoon, or I don't know, you're adding some change to what you offer in terms of service offerings, or maybe you're doing some stuff in the changes in what you're offering online. It's going to allow you to embrace it if you're able to acknowledge honestly and openly in your presentation and your communication about it, that there is competition at play here. Everybody knows that there's competition for their time. And again, it's not just the church down the street. It's the soccer league, and it's sleeping in, and it's Netflix, and it's all this other stuff that people have as competing opportunities to use their time on. Any day that you might offer a meaningful ministry program, there's lots of other things competing for people. And so naming it just like they do head on, Apple's just like naming that there's competition, that they want to be better than, they want to offer a better service than, they want to have a solution that they think is more meaningful to the user than their competition. And they name it in their presentation today. And they're able to say even, get some feedback on, like, hey, we are actually doing this better than our competitors, than these guys down the street who are vying for your time. And so, for example, even within some of their app demos, they're using what you could say is like competitor companies' products if that product is better. So, for example, in a number of the demos of the presentation today, they were using Microsoft software products. So they were showing demonstrations of Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint as well. They weren't afraid to use somebody else's product to show you how their product could make it better. So maybe it's thinking about, let's name and acknowledge that the soccer league on the Sunday morning is a competitor for the thing that we're doing. Okay. So then show us how you can integrate your life at the soccer league, the thing that you're doing already, the product that you're already using, into the church service thing. So I don't know. I mean, this is all off the top of my head because I just watched the presentation. It's super fresh to me. But in a church setting, maybe that looks like show people how you acknowledge that the competition is the soccer league that they're playing in on a Sunday morning, and show them how they can bring the service with them to the sidelines, watch it on their iPad while they're at the soccer camp, or the in the bleachers while their kid plays soccer. Is it ideal that they're not in church, but rather watching your service on an iPad with, split dedication between what you're doing in church and what's happening on the soccer field? Well, no, it isn't ideal, but nor is it ideal for people to use with Apple. Wouldn't they prefer you to use their products? They want you to use Numbers and Pages and all, Keynote, which is their product, but they're acknowledging that a lot of people are using Microsoft products on their hardware. So might as well show how these things can integrate. Show a way that you can acknowledge and celebrate that people can use the thing that you're doing, integrate it into the rest of their life. And it doesn't have to be always a competition, that the two things can go together. Another thing, just like humor and playfulness, just want to make a note that in the presentation by Apple today, they joked around. They're definitely like kind of nerdy jokes. They're not maybe a bit like a dad joke vibe. But you can even see like in their demos of like the chat rooms going back and forth, the emojis they're using, the this one woman who's showing how you can now from your phone unlock and give permission for someone else to drive your car, and she's joking about how like will she give this guy Tim Cook full access or maybe just like less access like you might want to give a teenage driver, and like so she's kind of teasing that like I guess she'll give him full access. And it was the point is that we don't need to be afraid to make a cheesy joke, to make light, to be a bit playful, to show the relationship between people who are featured. Maybe you want to show relationships between pastors, or relationship between a pastor and an elder, or pastor and the spouse of the pastor, or whatever it may be. Pastors and the kids, if the kids are in the background, if you're doing a live service. I think it's really fun and meaningful to not be serious all the time, even when we're talking about serious things. I love that Apple can be nerdy and make some jokes and just be playful in what they're doing. Okay, another item that I want to pull out of this is about privacy. Apple's presentation spent a full 8 minutes out of I think the whole presentation was like an hour, 20 minutes. And 8 of those minutes, what's the math on that? I don't know. Somebody else, if you're better at doing the math or you want to pull out your calculator, tell us what percentage that is. They spent 8 full minutes out of about an hour and a half presentation just on privacy issues. A significant portion of their presentation was spent on privacy and what they're doing about it. So what that tells us in churches is that privacy is and will continue to be into the future a growing and significant concern for people. People care about what you're doing with their information. People care to know that when you're caring for their kids, that they are safe. People care to know that when they give you their email address, you're not going to sell it to someone, or you're not going to post pictures of them maybe without their permission, that their attendance at the event or their participation in a request for prayer time or whatever it is, that there are things about their engagement with you as a church community that feels private. You want to be explicit and clear as much as possible, as regularly as you can. Maybe there's even a whole page on your website about your privacy policy. That would be an easy next step. Have a page called, yourchurchname.com/privacy. You could have a whole page just outlining how you are taking privacy seriously and how you're making sure that their information and their face, their likeness, and the likeness and safety of their kids, not just safety in a program, but safety of their information is kept private. More and more people are concerned about that. Where is their data going? How is it being used by organizations? And the fact that Apple spent 8 minutes of their presentation just talking about privacy reminds us as churches that that's a huge issue that we need to continue to be diligent about, not just caring for people's privacy, but also then communicating about how we are using their privacy. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. Another item, I have a couple more here. Quotes from real users in the community. I loved at this Apple presentation today that there would pop up, just like I can do here, like just as an example, as Amanda's talking, I can pop up with what she said to me right here on the screen. It's so powerful and meaningful when you can show quotes, stories, again, with permission. We just talked about privacy, but get quotes or stories or little sound bites from people that you can add into how you are reaching and teaching people. So if you're trying to reach people, maybe you want to include in how you're reaching people, how you're communicating that, stories of other people who've been new to the community and how your community has impacted them, what their first time experience was like. Just a simple quote to say like, first time at your church, loved it, I'll definitely be back. Add that quote. Maybe you want to add that quote into an invitation you're doing, into a Facebook ad you're doing, into a print card invitation to a kids camp you're doing. Whatever it is, anywhere you can, and maybe right on your website if you have like an About Us or an I'm New page, you're trying to reach new people. Well, maybe right there you want to have a few quick quotes, get some feedback from people about their experience. You can do that by sending out an email to get their experience, maybe a quick survey at the end of their experience, or maybe it's from social media quotes, posts and comments in social media, wherever you can grab those real feedback experiences, just like Apple did in their presentation today. You can pop up on your screen, on a print piece, on a web page, even as an Instagram. It can be social media posts, where you can make the quote look really beautiful on the page, on the Instagram feed, or whatever it may be. I encourage you, like Apple, to use quotes from real people in your community. And it also, I think, speaking on the teach side, teaches people what you want from them. The more you show quotes, or the more you show consumer experiences or congregational experiences, the more it's teaching people you want that kind of feedback. So it starts to show people that if they give you that feedback, you're actually going to use it. And so I love that Apple is doing that. It encourages us to continue to give our feedback to them, to continue to share the stories of our user experience with Apple, so that they're going to respond to it because it looks like they're listening to us, because they are listening to us. And in the same way in church, does it look like you're listening? Do you want to share those stories and testimonials of how people have been impacted by your church community? And also, the more you share those stories, the more it reinforces that you want those stories, and you begin to get more and more feedback from people because they believe that you want it. So even on a Sunday morning, if you're doing a live stream or a service like this, encourage you to try and pop something up below or to the side, to have some quotes integrated into, could be the pre-service role, could be part of a hosting segment, wherever it may be that is appropriate, even whether live or in other online materials or printed materials. Testimonials are huge, and we learned that from Apple today. Two more things were just two things in one. The last thing I want to say is just they made sure to address the current times that we're in. It is not a time for churches to be tone deaf, nor is it a time for Apple to be tone deaf to the reality of all the things that are going on today. So right off the top, they're addressing things about race issues in America, and they're addressing that we value their values around diversity, and that being anti-racist and all this kind of stuff is right and baked into the beginning of how they start. They're naming the thing that people are feeling right now and wrestling through and seeing online, on their own social media, on the news, all over the place. They're addressing it right off the top. You don't want to be tone deaf and pretend like you live in some isolated bubble away from the real world. No, the people who go to your church, the people who you're trying to reach to come to your church, are living in the world that you're living in. We're all living in the same world, and so we want to make sure to address any pertinent or pressing issues that are going on in the world today. And one more thing after that is simply that at the very end of the presentation, they talk about their pandemic compliance. So they're naming right on the screen what they did to ensure safety of the production team, how they cleaned regularly all the places that they were filming, how no extra people were there if they weren't necessary, and those kinds of things. So again, people are looking for you to communicate with them about what you're doing to care for their safety as they come to your church, and care for the safety of your staff. It matters to people that you're taking, COVID-19 precautions seriously, that you're adhering to the guidelines of your local government. And you want to, again, just if you can have a chance at the end. I love that they just do it at the end. It was just a scroll, simple at the end. So maybe it's at the end of a Sunday service, a simple thing about how you on your live stream are making sure to keep people safe, to clean things regularly, and to not have more people than necessary involved in the production of church, so that you can keep everyone healthy and safe. Because we're seeing all these headlines, aren't we, about churches that have met and then people got sick. And I just saw something today, like 250 people at one single church all got sick from the coronavirus, sometime in the last couple of weeks. And so some of that can be preemptive. Let's care for people and clean and all that kind of stuff. But also let's communicate how we are caring for our people, so that they feel that we are building trust with them and that we are caring for them. All right, I'm going to leave my contact information in the comments section. I'd love to hear from you if you're watching. We're going to wrap up today. Thank you so much for hanging out and joining in. If you are watching this later, let me know what you've learned about how to do church, how to reach and teach people, how to communicate better, all through what we've learned at Apple's presentation today. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.